people know, young people in America consider Kennedy like some god, but I didn't know anything that he did or achieved that was of any particular interest or noteworthiness. You know, so I don't consider that the same sort of turning point as the Lincoln situation in America. So you often wonder what would have happened if someone hadn't been killed in this way. I think Teddy Roosevelt was another one I mentioned to you. Anyway, he was born Ahad Asher Zvi Ginsburg, you know, and he's further east, you see, in Russia, Ukraine. So it would be a different outlook. It wouldn't be as modern as the Budapest people, the Vienna people, the German people, the Herzl type people, Nordau in England, Brandeis in America, and so on. They wouldn't be a modern outlook. They would be more, well, more like the ghetto mentality, if you want to call it that. More Eastern, not liberated, not very aware of the modern world in that sense. Someone like Ben Yehuda would be someone who went west and did study in the West, so he actually was probably pretty modern, even though his return to Hebrew was, I think, an intellectual process that he chose to do in an intellectual fashion. Ukraine in 1856. He tried to go to West, but finally to Vienna, Berlin, places like that, according to our introduction here, but finally moved to Odessa. I've been hearing that people who want to invest money at the moment, that Odessa is the big place to buy real estate today for people who know about these things. I just heard that from my son, who's in the Fashion Network, and apparently there are people in that world that are investing in Odessa. Why would people invest in Odessa? What's in Odessa that's so interesting? Remember, Pinsker came from Odessa. Odessa is the Black Sea port of the Russians. Now I think it's part of the Ukraine. I don't think it's in Russia anymore. But it's supposed to have a very marvelous climate and very Mediterranean-like, very balmy and so on. And it's just apparently a very, very beautiful location and place. So it is pretty modern at this point vis-a-vis where he would have come from. And that is Ahad. So he knows about the Haskalah, things of that kind. And he knew about the Hibat Zion movement. That's on page 255. And but what he was really interested in was Judaism. Judaism as such. I don't really see him as a Zionist as such. He's interested in the whole problem of Reform Judaism and integrating Zionism and other things into that. And therefore the movement that he represents comes to be called cultural Zionism. Comes to be called cultural Zionism. So you see now, what is the difference of cultural Zionism, political Zionism, then the others would be labor Zionism, and you could call it practical Zionism, which is just more a sort of communism applied to the Holy Land. Political Zionism would also be practical Zionism, but these labor Zionism would be represented by people. I guess we have Ben-Gurion in this book somewhere. Ben-Gurion, who helped found the state, but they come out of the socialist kibbutz movement. They're actually, they go to Israel as pioneers in kibbutz, which is the Jewish or Hebrew word for kibbutz, means to collect. It's a collective. It's a collective, like in the communist Eastern Europe. Collective farm, collective agricultural community. In Israel, there are several kinds of these collectives, and they all belong to different. They used to be very important before really capitalism took over the last 25 years, and you have the Silicon Valley type of mentality permeating a lot of areas around Tel Aviv. By the way, people who saw Tel Aviv, who had seen Odessa, even non-Jews, but Russians and people like that, like for instance, the famous, I don't know if you remember, but there was an actor in Hollywood called Akim Tamarov. He came from Odessa, and he said when he saw Tel Aviv, he thought he was seeing Odessa. The architecture, the way it laid out, everything like it, reminded him apparently of Odessa. So you have basically a lot of different parties. They all have their kibbutz movement. There's more left-wing, center, but they're all left-wing, but there's extreme left-wing, center left-wing, right center left-wing, all that sort of thing. And you'd have to know the whole history of Israel to know these things. But one of the more right-wing sort of groups who were still left-wing didn't like the kibbutz movement. So they founded something called a moshav. So now, kibbutz everything is owned in common. You have the leaders in the community, they're still there. They're not as important in society as they used to be. As I told you, the Silicon Valley generation, others have taken more of the center stage for the economy in Israel. The kibbutz movement used to make up the backbone of the Israeli army. I mean, you couldn't get people who were called yeshiva bookers. Of whom we may have some around this campus someplace. People who sat and studied in yeshivas and didn't do much else than that. You couldn't get yeshiva bookers to really, do much in an army. Now you do a little bit. Some of the religious settlements, mostly in the occupied territories as they're called, those are mostly religious settlements, a lot of them, where religious people have gone under some economic benefit situation for them, and their children are pretty turned on sort of people, religiously speaking, and they go into the army now too. Can I see them? They all be wearing little caps. We used to call them in this country kappa a yarmulke, but in Israel they're called kippahs. Israel they're called kippahs. And you can always tell if a guy's walking around with a machine gun and a kippah, he's usually from a religious kibbutz or something like that. I can't speak for the women. I don't know what they'd be wearing in similar situations. Or if they got the sit-sits hanging out. You know what sit-sit are?
I've seen them camouflaged.
Sit-sit are the fringes that the religious people wear under their clothing. You might have seen it in that movie, The Chosen, if you saw the